Get ready for tactical fireworks. We have a classic Sicilian Najdorf showdown between Kiik and the magician from Riga himself, the legendary Mihail Tal. The game kicks off with pawn to e4, answered by the Sicilian c5. We quickly enter the open Sicilian as white plays pawn to d4, and after the trade, black's knight comes to f6, challenging the center. White opts for the aggressive f4 setup, looking to seize space. Tal completes his development and then strikes back in the center with the classic Sicilian pawn break to e5, and the fight is on. After black's pawn snaps up the one on f4, pieces continue to fly onto the board. Both bishops find active squares, and with both kings safely castled kingside, the stage is set for a massive middle game clash. And here we go. White uncorks the brilliant knight to d5. This is a fantastic positional sacrifice, blowing open the position to disrupt black's harmony and create attacking chances. What a move. Tal has no choice but to accept the challenge, and his bishop takes the knight on d5, and white's pawn recaptures on d5. This is the only move, creating a powerful passed pawn and keeping the pressure cranked up to the maximum. Black's knight hops into b4, creating immediate threats. White calmly pushes the pawn to c4 to wall it off. Tal plays queen to b6 with check, but this is a slight inaccuracy. The engine actually preferred the immediate knight to g4, which would have posed more difficult questions for white to solve. And white plays the only good response, calmly stepping the king to h1 to get out of the check and prepare for the coming storm. Now Tal plays it. The knight jumps to g4, putting immense pressure on white's kingside and eyeing key squares. But white slips with knight to d4. This allows black to untangle. The much stronger defensive move was bishop to e5, challenging black's control and keeping the position much more solid. Black's knight immediately takes the bishop on d3, and after the queen recaptures, Tal's own bishop develops to the excellent f6 square. White brings a rook to the d-file, but Tal's queen is a menace, snagging the pawn on b2. White grabs a pawn back on d6, and black's rook joins the party on e8. The pieces continue to dance around the board. White's knight reroutes, and the bishop finds a new home, while Tal's queen probes from a2, creating all sorts of problems for white's coordination. And there it is. Another brilliant sacrifice from Tal. The knight leaps to e5, a stunning move that gives up material to fully activate his remaining pieces and keep white completely off balance. White is forced to capture, and the bishop takes the knight on e5, and Tal's bishop recaptures on e5. This is the only move, maintaining the initiative and ensuring that his sacrifice pays dividends. The position is incredibly complex. White repositions the knight to e3, and black's queen grabs another pawn on a4. White pushes the c-pawn, and Tal's queen rushes back to d7 to defend. White finds a fantastic square for the knight, which lands on f5, putting a ton of pressure on black's king position. Tal defends with rook to e8, but this is an inaccuracy under pressure. The better move was rook to e6, which would have created a much more resilient defensive setup, and white immediately capitalizes. The d-pawn marches forward to d6, the queen shifts to c4, and the rook lifts to b6. The pressure is becoming unbearable for black, but Tal finds the only move. Queen to c8 is a fantastic defensive resource, just barely holding the position together against white's onslaught. White has built up a massive advantage here, but he needs to keep the tension. Instead, he makes a slip. The much stronger try was the rook swinging to b3. After king to f8, the queen slides to g4. Following pawn to g6, the knight would land on e7, and white's attack is overwhelming. But in the game, white pushes the pawn to c6, releasing all the pressure and letting Tal right back into the game. A huge relief for black. Tal gratefully accepts the gift, and his pawn takes the pawn on c6. Unbelievable. White finds a third brilliant move. Knight to e7 with check. It's another sacrifice, desperately trying to reignite the attack and create new problems. And Tal finds the only correct reply, capturing the knight with his rook from d7, landing on e7. White's pawn recaptures on e7, creating a monster passed pawn on the 7th rank. This should be decisive, and here, under extreme pressure, even the great Tal makes a decisive mistake. This next move should lose the game on the spot. He had to find the amazing queen to e6. After queen takes queen on e6, pawn recaptures on e6. Now rook takes the pawn on c6, and after bishop to f6, black is fighting for a draw. But instead of that, Tal's rook takes the pawn on e7, and this is a losing move. White now has a clear path to victory. White finds the correct punishment. The rook takes the pawn on c6, and the advantage is simply overwhelming. Tal plays queen to d7, but it's another inaccuracy. The tougher defense was queen to e8, which would have forced white to be a little more precise to convert the win. This is it. The position is completely, totally winning for white. All he has to do is play the simple crushing move, but what happens next is absolutely shocking. The simple win was rook to c8 with check. The black rook must block on e8. Then rook takes rook on e8. Check. Queen recaptures on e8. And with rook to e1, the game is over. But in a moment of chess blindness, white plays rook takes pawn on f7, an unbelievable blunder that throws away a completely won game in a single move. And Tal pounces. The queen snaps up the rook on c6, and just like that, the tables have completely turned. Still reeling from his mistake, white makes another one, and this is the final nail in the coffin. He had to trade queens to survive. The necessary line was queen takes queen on c6. After king takes the rook on f7, pawn to g4, pawn to h6, and queen to f3 check, white is still in the game. But instead of that simple trade, he desperately plays rook takes pawn on g7 with check, a move which loses on the spot, and Tal fires off one last brilliant move. The king simply takes the rook on g7. He has calculated everything and knows that he is now completely winning. White is forced to trade, and his queen takes the queen on c6. And Tal plays the final decisive move, rook to c7. With this, white's position completely collapses. There is nothing left to be done. What an absolutely insane game, full of brilliance, sacrifices, blunders, and chaos. In the end, after a shocking turnaround, Mihail Tal wins,